Before I dive into the game of Clockwork Aquario, I think it's important to understand that this game has taken nearly 30 years to get released. Clockwork Aquario was developed back in 1992 by a company called Westone Bit Entertainment, who I personally know from doing the Wonder Boy games. Now, Clockwork Aquario was supposed to be their last big hurrah into arcade gaming back in 1992 for a 1994 release. However, at that time, arcades were transitioning to 3D games, and the initial testing audience for Clockwork Aquario didn't really give the thumbs up for the game, so it was withdrawn. And then, unfortunately, Westone Bit Entertainment closed its doors in 2013, and this game was thought to be lost. In Games have been, over the last couple of years, chomping up various projects and source codes from other companies and restoring them into a playable game that can be released. So we're getting to play all of these games that just seem to have fallen by the wayside, and Clockwork Aquario is a prime example of a game that I feel is so worthy of release, and it should have been released in 1994. Grr. So, on with the actual game itself now that we've had a little trip down memory lane. Clockwork Aquario is a traditional 2D platform adventure game where you play as one of three characters who I think handle a very tiny bit differently, but for all intents and purposes are the same character, manoeuvring around 6 different stages, killing everything in sight so that they can get to the end and rescue various underwater animals. For me, this harks right the way back to the very quintessential basics of early 90s platform adventure games, and I would say probably the closest game that this comes to, and it sounds a bit weird to say it, is Ghosts and Goblins. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Every life that you have has a 2 hit points system, so you get hit once and you're kind of stunned, but then if you get hit again then you die, and then you kind of float off like a little angel to the top of the screen. And in a really cool move actually, you kind of hang glider back in again, so you can position yourself where you're going to respawn. Sometimes that can be quite handy to get yourself into a strategic location. But it's not just you that's set up like that, all of the enemies are too. And key to Clockwork Aquario is your ability to stun everything and then pick it up and throw it at everything else. So, what you'll be doing is manoeuvring around with the D-pad or the analog stick, jumping and double jumping, but then you've got like this pathetic like slap attack. It's a melee attack. You have no ranged abilities unless you collect the star power up. And when you hit something, it turns blue and kind of is knocked out and stunned. And then if you just walk into it, you pick it up. And so what you can then do is throw that enemy, or you can throw power-ups as well at your enemies so that you can clear paths as you go. That's really handy because sometimes things are in like a big long line, so if you time it right you can clear out a huge line of enemies. You get a combo score that helps yourself as you go along, but you can also then get the enemies to spawn gems when they die, and collecting those gems fills up your like 1-up meter. And then that gives you an extra life, which means that you are no longer on a 2 hit point per life system. It will be a 3 or a 4, depending on how quickly you can kind of level it up again. So, fantastic way to really incentivize melee attacks to then pick something up and then throw it around everywhere. And it took me a little while to get used to it, because the sole criticism that I have for this entire game is they don't tell you the controls anywhere whatsoever. That gives you tons and tons of options, which I'll dive into, but at no point does it tell you what the controls are, nor can you rebind them. So, as you go through these different 6 stages, you get more and more different types of enemies that you can try and stun and take down and throw around everywhere. There's a couple of power-ups. One makes you invincible if you combine the 2 power-ups together, and you're able to do it within a quick succession, which I thought was a really cool twist on things as well. And this game can be played in co-op too. Now, all of my gameplay, as you'll see, is in single player mode. I didn't have someone locally that I could play it with, but I can imagine it being a good blast, and that would actually really help with the bosses, because the bosses, whilst they are relatively easy to get through, I was doing it because I was spamming my own hit points at the same time. So that was my kind of only lopsided, that didn't quite work so well. The bosses are really well drawn and they look great, but their actual difficulty isn't too high. In games have also gone above and beyond just getting this game out there by providing tons of extra options and extras as well, which I think should be the almost gold standard bar that other remasters of these types of games should aim for. The entire game's soundtrack by composer Shinichi Sakamoto is available here for you to play quite happily as a standalone thing inside the game. Fantastic, because the soundtrack is superb. There's also a gallery of concept art, promo art, all of that for you to kind of zoom in and play around with and have a look at, including little fan note that's been like scanned in from the original developers, which I thought was really quite sweet. Then when you get into the actual games themselves, you've got an easy, medium and hard mode, which lets you try and complete the game with a certain amount of continues. But inside those modes, you can also scale up the graphics. So you've got what's called perfect mode, which was where I personally played most of the time, because it's an exact pixel by pixel replication of what the game was originally made in. Then you've got like a 1-to-1 scale, which throws it out vertically to the edges of the screen, but not quite fully horizontally, so that it still stays like it bloomed out but still at the same proportions. And then you've got full screen mode, which does stretch the graphics out somewhat, and I found that quite difficult to play with, although it's nice to have the option. Because this game's playable in co-op, there's also a bonus 2-player minigame that has then been lifted out of the game so that you can play that separately. And the arcade mode comes with tons of little tiny tweaks to like graphical shaders and inputs and all of this kind of stuff. There are options there that I didn't even know what I was tweaking or doing, but the fact that it's all there for you to muck about with, I just thought was a really great extra. And it's something that I really like to see on other games, because it's very rare to see the options tweakable and like different dev states of the game to be available for you to muck about with like this. So yeah, big thumbs up from that perspective. Ultimately, Clockwork Aquario is one of those games that I think people can enjoy for a breezy half-hour playthrough on an arcade classic that you just never got to play. It's a travesty that this game wasn't released in 1994. This is the kind of thing that I would be picking up to have a lazy Saturday afternoon on my Mega Drive at home when I was a teen and a kid. So yeah, now's the time. Thumbs up from me. Good arcade, cheesy fun. Have at it. The game's been released in Europe and Japan on the 30th of November, with a North American release on the 14th of December. There's also a limited edition physical version by strictlylimitedgames.com, and I'll have a written review over on higherplanegames.com. You guys take care. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.